In this video, I'm going to introduce you to algebra. I'm going to go through some basic algebra vocabulary, and then we're going to combine like terms. I could talk a lot about what algebra is, but I'm briefly just going to say that algebra is a mathematical language. You are learning a new language here, used to interpret and represent patterns in numbers. These patterns in numbers are things that you're already familiar with. You know 2 times 4. You know 5 plus 6. You know what happens when you repeat adding 6 over and over and over again. That's like multiplication. You know these patterns in numbers. We're going to represent them using variables, expressions, and equations. Let's briefly talk about what variables, expressions, and equations are. Variables represent a number. It could be any number. It's a placeholder. Think of it as representing like a question mark, like a blank. We don't know what the variable is. It changes. That's why the root of this word is vary, because it changes. Expressions are made up of variables or just one variable, numbers and or symbols. An example of an expression would be 3x plus 5. Another example of an expression would just be 4. It doesn't have to have terms in it. It doesn't have to have multiple variables in it, just pieces of math, if you will. And then equations are actually made up of expressions which are equal to each other. So if I put 3x plus 5 equals 4, that is an equation because it has an equal sign in it. 3x plus 5 is an expression, 4 is an expression. When we look at the whole thing as a whole together, it is now an equation. Pretty important that we understand the difference between expressions and equations. Equations are things that are equal to each other. Again, the root word there is equa, which always means equal, like equivalent is also equal. So if I write an equation, let's say it's 2x equals 4, that's an equation. It can be solved, and we're going to talk more about what solve is in a minute. From now on with algebra, we are only going to say that solving is equations. We don't solve any other kind of math problem in algebra. You don't solve expressions. You don't solve fractions. You don't solve word problems unless there's an equation in there that you solve. The only thing that you solve in math is equations, especially in algebra, okay? I know in general we use that word to mean solving any kind of problem, but in math, we only solve equations. Now, the other word that we're going to talk about here in just a second is simplify. So simplify can be both expressions and equations. Sometimes we need to simplify an expression or an equation in order to solve it. Sometimes we need to simplify an equation in order to solve it. So simplifying and solving can both relate to equations, but we only simplify expressions. We don't solve it. I'm not putting solve over here because you don't solve it. If I have an expression 3x plus 8, I'm not going to be able to solve that. Even if I made it 3x plus 4x, I'm not solving it. I'm just going to be able to simplify it, which we'll talk more about in a minute. I'm going to run through these definitions pretty quickly. Feel free to pause if you need to write them down. Simplify means no like terms, no parentheses. Simplify can mean a lot of different things in math, but when we simplify expressions, there should be no like terms and no parentheses. Solve means you find the value or values which make the equation or equations true. Basically, you're trying to make a true statement. That's solve. Coefficient is a number multiplied by a variable. An example here in 3x, 3 is the coefficient of x. Terms are the pieces of an expression which are separated by plus or minus, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Constant is a number without a variable. Factor is a piece of a multiplication problem. So in 5x, 5 and x are factors. 5 is also known as the coefficient. So sometimes words have different vocabulary, 2 different vocabulary words that apply to them. And then exponent in 4x to the third power, 3 is the exponent. It means the x times x times x. 3 x's multiplied together. All right, we have our first problem. It's asking us to simplify. So if you remember our definition before, we can't have any like terms, no like terms, and no parentheses, which is already not an issue here because we don't have any parentheses. So what is a like term? So first of all, terms are separated by addition symbols. So we have 1 term, 2 terms, 3 terms, 4 terms here. There are 4 terms in this problem. The coefficient of x is 4, the coefficient of this y is 3, the coefficient of this x is 5, and the coefficient of this y is 1. There's always an understood 1 as a coefficient if there is no coefficient to the y visible. Okay, so those are our like terms. There are not like terms, those are our terms, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4x is a term, plus 3y is a term, plus 5x is a term, and plus 1y is a term. I am going to put a box around what we consider the like terms, including the symbol in front of it, if there is one, to the left of it. So I'm going to box the plus, and this is really important. Please write this example down and box the symbol in front of it. I'm going to circle 3y and 1y. So like terms are terms which have the same form of the variable. So 4x and 5x are like terms, and I can combine those together. So I'm actually going to rearrange this a little bit and put them right next to each other. And then 3y and y both have y, so I can add them together. And I'm just going to add the coefficients. So 4 plus 5 is 9, and 3 plus 1 is 4y. And that's my answer. I'm not trying to figure out what x is. I'm not trying to figure out what y is. I'm just simplifying it so that I have no like terms, and I have no more like terms that I can add together. Let's look at one more example where we simplify. These two right here are like terms. They're like terms because they have the same variable and the same exponent. So we can combine them. Notice when I take a box and I put it around this, I'm boxing the whole term, including the minus. The minus belongs to the 8, not to the 4. Then I have 4x and 3x are also like terms, but not like terms with the squares. Those are two different terms. So 3x squared, I'm going to bring the minus 8 over with it when I rearrange these. And then I'm going to write the plus 4x and the plus 3x next to each other because they're buddies. I'm going to subtract the coefficients this time because it's 3 minus 8x, so that's negative 5. And the variable stays the same. It's still going to be x squared. And then I'm going to combine the coefficients here. And I get 7x, and this is my answer, negative 5x squared plus 7x. I can't simplify that anymore because x squared and x are not like terms.